Here with more, Fiscal Times columnist Liz Peek and CivicForumPAC chairman Ford O'Connell. Good to see you both.
Good to be here, Trish.
Ford, walk me through, first of all, why this may have been illegal or in violation of campaign finance law. In other words, if you look through the documents, the Hillary Clinton campaign, the DNC, basically put it down as legal services. But in fact, it was services from Fusion GPS and Christopher Steele, and they were out there gathering whatever kind of seedy intelligence, much of which reads like a work of fiction, to try and take down the president, which then, by the way, may have been instrumental in the FBI wiretapping the Trump campaign. But let's start first with whether or not what Hillary Clinton did, and her campaign, I should say, and the DNC did, was that in violation of campaign finance law?
Yes, because basically they were trying to shield themselves from Fusion GPS. They used a law firm as a cutout, and then on their Federal Election Committee report, they basically said they were paying the law firm for legal services, and really the law firm was nothing more than a pass-through to pay Fusion GPS and Christopher Steele, who's the British spy. Let me just say this. We got to stop calling this a Trump-Russian dossier. It is really nothing more than a political hit job on Donald Trump. And frankly, what's incredible here is that Hillary Clinton has been sanctimonious lying about this for more than a year and essentially calling Trump's actions treasonous. And lo and behold, we find out that she was the one, or her campaign was the one actually behind this political hit job.
That indeed is the irony of it all, Liz Peek, because we've been talking about Russia collusion and may actually look as though there was indeed some Russian collusion. It just wasn't with the players the Democrats wanted us to think it was with.
It's an extraordinary story that Hillary Clinton would so aggressively press these inquiries into malicious activities by the Russians when, in fact, her own camp was involved in it. But I think the bigger story about this dossier, so to speak, this file that was compiled on Trump, is that it was used, I think, apparently, to get search warrants and surveillance okays to spy on the Trump campaign and even perhaps on the president himself. I think we've known for some time that Obama's Justice Department was corrupt, but this really takes it to a new level. This is clearly not just inappropriate, but it's actually kind of frightening to me.
Let me build on that, Liz, because you're absolutely right. I think what should concern all Americans, regardless of political party, is how this information made itself into the intelligence community and probably was the primary impetus not only for the Russian probe, but for wiretaps on Trump campaign officials and probably transition officials. That should concern everyone because essentially a salacious document is being used to spy on Americans.
So let's back up for a second, because there's nothing illegal with opposition research.
Right.
I mean, you may say it's kind of immoral, but unfortunately, this is why no one likes politics, by the way, and nobody wants to get into politics because the other side will just make up lies about you, and you're stuck trying to, you're constantly on defense. But there's nothing necessarily illegal in them making up these lies. I mean, you could sue for libel, this, that, and the other, but sometimes it's too late. No, so Ford, okay, Liz, I'll get you back in a second, but Ford, assuming that, okay, it's legal to have this opposition research and make up these stories, at what point, though, does it start getting really questionable? Because then the administration, the Obama administration, may have used these sketchy stories, this opposition research, to wiretap a campaign. I mean, that's, to me, where it just starts getting out in left field. How could they do that?
Well, this is one of these things where President Trump essentially calls it modern age Watergate, this and the Uranium One together. Here's how they can actually do it. If the FBI uses it as the basis, then essentially it could conceivably be done. But I think what's troubling here is it's unverified. If I were really scared and I were venture to guess how the FBI used this as a wiretap, I would say that Christopher Steele, the British spy, gave it to MI6. MI6 then gave it to U.S. Intel, and therefore you'd need a lower threshold to actually get that FISA warrant. This is really a whole shell game to actually target
In the
Trump
meantime,
campaign officials.
There's something else going on as well. I mean, the news just keeps coming, or the hits, we should say, for Hillary Clinton keep on coming, because we're getting more and more information about the Uranium One deal as well, Liz. And we're learning that the informant is going to be able to testify, and we anticipate getting much more information from that informant. But as I've said all along, and given your business background as well, I don't know how a deal like this happens. I mean, I really and truly don't, because I know how sensitive cross-border transactions are. And when you suddenly have a nation that really had not been perceived as very hospitable, Russia, buying such an interest in strategic resources in the United States of America, I don't know how a deal like that possibly, Liz, goes through.
Well, there are safeguards against just such a transaction, it should be said, and it has to be approved by a 9-agency group called CFIUS. But I would have to assume that the State Department is one of the more important members of that 9-member group. And it does appear that Hillary Clinton greenlighted this transaction even over the objections of security personnel who knew, number one, that Putin had targeted acquisition of uranium reserves for strategic purposes, very important to Russia. So this wasn't just a one-off casual investment. This is something they were really working on.
Well, they were investigating it. The FBI at the time was investigating.
That's the new news.
Why it was that Vladimir Putin was trying to grow his influence in the atomic energy sector. So let me give you some names. Part of that CFIUS committee included, indeed, Hillary Clinton at the State Department, but also Tim Geithner at Treasury, Eric Holder at DOJ, Janet Napolitano at Homeland Security, Robert Gates at Defense, Department of Energy, Stephen Chu. I get it, and the list goes on. But Hillary Clinton, and do we have the sound, guys? We can play the sound. She was asked, actually, by no, we don't have it. Okay, WMUR about this New Hampshire station, and she basically tried to say, look, it didn't get to my desk. And that's what I keep on hearing. Here we go. We got the quote for you. There were 9 government agencies who would have to sign off on that deal. I was not personally involved because that wasn't something the Secretary of State did. Well, now we're either talking about total incompetence, because, by the way, Secretary of State Clinton, you ought to be looking at a deal like that. So it's either total incompetence or there's something else forward at play.
Well, it seems to be that there's something else going on here. She's claiming, I'm sticking my head in the sand like an ostrich. But when you start to look around it, besides the FBI investigations that are going on, which, by the way, Robert Mueller was overlooking that investigation, you also have Frank Giustra, who is trying to sell the company the Russians, giving her foundation a large amount of money. And at the same time, Bill Clinton was making a $500,000 speech to Russian bankers at the same time. So when you start looking at this, whether or not she had her head in the sand, she should have known about it, because frankly, it's something smells rotten here, a lot like Denmark.
It's one of those things, separation of church and state, right? Hey, honey, maybe you shouldn't take the $500,000 gig in Russia, because it turns out we've just approved the Russians to purchase 20% of uranium here in the U.S. Thank you so much, Liz, and